I will start then. Um, yeah, that's the title that was attributed. I would do it a small change. I don't measure any central blood pressure yet, and the blood pressure itself. That is a very interesting project we are doing, but it would take too much time to present, and it's also IP stuff, so I cannot say a lot. And so the updated title would be the estimation of pressure drop and flow inefficiencies. And for that, the first question is, why is pressure drop important clinically? And it's very important. It's a main marker on several stenotic diseases, and it's simply because whenever there is a stenosis, the heart has to work harder to overcome this stenotic region, this extra load. So this pressure drop exists in every stenotic condition, like stenotic aortic valve, coarctation of the aorta, or obstructive cardiomyopathy. To measure the pressure drop, there are two main tools used clinically. One is the Doppler echocardiography. The second is catheterization. They are used daily as if they were the same measurement, but unfortunately they are not. And the Doppler echocardiography is relative pressure, it's instantaneous, whereas the catheterization is peak to peak. So there is a time gap between before the stenosis and after the stenosis. So the catheterization tends to be slightly lower value than Doppler. And finally, there are also other differences in the pressure estimation depending where do we measure the pressure. So as you can see in this plot under, there is a conversion from potential to kinetic energy here, which is partially recovered down the line. So there is a maximum pressure drop, which is the one measured in Doppler, and there is a net pressure drop, which is how much, which account for how much pressure was recovered. These are important concepts that were tested, during my PhD, and I will go through them very fastly. So, but to measure the pressure drop, to estimate the pressure drop, what we can do based on images is the same as it is done in Doppler as a first estimation, which is simply 4 times the velocity max measured, which is the peak velocity. What we use then is the evolution of the simplified Bernoulli, that instead of accounting only for the peak velocity, it accounts also for the full profile across one cross section of the vessel or the left ventricle outflow tract, and there we have some sort of paraboloid, and it's closer to the reality. And then if we have a lot of time to compute and a lot of spatial and temporal resolution, then we can compute the work energy relative pressure, which is VERP, which is then based on the volume pressure difference, and it accounts for the kinetic energy part, the advective energy part, and the viscous energy part. As you can see here, it is derived from the Navier-Stokes equation. So the kinetic energy is basically the acceleration in time. The advective energy is basically what simplified Bernoulli is, and here we have what we call SAW is considering only the advective component, which is the predominant component whenever the stenosis is higher. So whenever we have a high velocity, this is the predominant component, so we can estimate that the others are neglectable. And finally, there is the viscous component, which is related with the friction in the wall and between layers of the flow. Finally, we can also include the turbulence, but I will speak about that in a second. So the first confirmed hypothesis was to compare the difference between maximum pressure drop and the net pressure drop. And to do that, what we wanted to check is that we developed this saw pressure drop so that we can match the simplified Bernoulli. We can match the catheterization and better predict it. And that's what we concluded, that the saw is a better match, so a surrogate of the simplified Bernoulli. Be careful, I say surrogate and I don't say that we are estimating really the measurement, because there is this temporal gap that we don't account for. So the simplified advective verb, the saw, is still relative measurement. So the second thing we wanted to test was the flow inefficiencies, and this is directly related with the pressure recovery, how much energy is recovered and for how long down the line of, in this case, the aorta artery. And what we realized is that if we compute the saw but in the opposite direction of the flow, we will have a very good surrogate of flow inefficiency, because if the flow, obviously is going backwards, is not what you want. So whenever that happens, there is flow inefficiency, and whenever we matched the distance of this flow inefficiency with the catheterization pressure recovery, then we realize that the distance also matches. So this is a good surrogate of flow inefficiency just down the line of the stenosis. Finally, we also wanted to focus on the backward saw, and what we saw is that by computing the backward saw as a flow inefficiency, we can also compute the forward saw as what is actual energy that is going forward, and that is positive flow. And there what we see is that forward saw, in cases where there is a lot of regurgitant flow in a cross section, the forward saw predicts even better the pressure drop than saw. This applies in vessels when you have a very big vessel and the jet is very small in the middle section of the vessel. And if you account for everything, then you end up with the overestimation also. Finally, to estimate the net pressure drop, the best tool that exists, if you have everything that you need, would be to compute the verb, so the work energy relative pressure, accounting for the kinetic, advective, and viscous pressure drop, but also for the turbulent pressure drop. The downside is that you need state-of-the-art MRI acquisition, and it's very, very expensive, both in money and both in time, but it's a perfect match with the invasive recordings, as you can see here. So I have been speaking in general about pressure drop, which is kind of a dinosaur together with ejection fraction in cardiology. But how does that head to the digital twin picture of the heart? Well, I will give two examples. I will try to be as fast as possible. So the first one that we can do is we can personalize 3D print valves. This is in the same direction as Peter was just speaking now. But I will say, what we did. So by 3D printing patient-specific valves, we can have different morphologies, as you can see here. These are healthy valve and 3 diseased valves, and then we can image them in MRI or echo, and we can see the different profiles across the valve, and this means that we can simulate the valve without being in the body, so it's a huge advantage to provide better treatment. So in this case, we place the valve in an aortic phantom, compliant, and then we measure the pressure drops. Here is an example where the measured pressure drop, which is here the star, matches very well the saw, where we can see that the simplified Bernoulli is an overestimation. We also place that valve in a straight phantom, where we want to measure the pressure recovery, and we have several ports down the wall of the phantom, and then we image it with the traditional Doppler, this BSI that is brand new, as Chrissy was speaking yesterday, and we image it also with the MRI for the flow. And then we study the pressure recovery down the length, and what we can see again is that the downslope of the saw, or the simplified Bernoulli pressure drop, along the length of the tube matches the real pressure drop recovered in the measurements done directly at the wall of the phantom. The second example I will take a bit longer, and it's a bit more complex, but is also much more directly related to clinic. Even more. So here what we did was to try to match the geometry and the function in the reconstructed hypoplastic left heart syndrome aorta, and we try to minimize the flow inefficiency. So this is, basically we were assessing if the intervention was well done, and if not, what could have been done better. So first, what is HLHS? Hypoplastic left heart syndrome is a disease that affects 1 out of 5,000 newborns, and basically the left ventricle is underdeveloped, and the right ventricle is responsible for the full circulation, so both the pulmonary and the systemic. The aorta is very small. There is the septal, atrial septal defect is open, so it doesn't close, and then the blood mixes, and we have to pump much more blood from the right ventricle. So to overcome this disease that was highly fatal in the 80s, almost impossible a child would survive, first the surgeons do an intervention within the first days of life of the child, which is to place a homograph patch to reconstruct the aorta. And this is very important because it's the basis of the study here. And basically we directly conduct the right ventricle to pump the systemic circulation. And so the next intervention is done a couple of months after the child is born, and has to do with connecting the veins to the systemic veins to the pulmonary circulation. So we have in the end one circulation only, and finally the surgery is to do the same with the inferior vena cava. But what matters for us is how well is placed this homograph tissue in the first intervention, and how does that affect the function and the anatomy. So for that, we acquired 4D flow MRI when the child were around 2 to 3 years old. We divided into 4 segments of the aorta: the ascending aorta, the transversal, and 2 of the descendings. And we measured the diameters, the wall thickness, the curvature of the arch, and then the pressure differences. So by calling them another name, we assess the conduit function and the reservoir function of the aorta. The conduit is how much the vessel is capable of transporting blood, which is basically the pressure drop we have been measuring. And extra, we measure the pulse wave velocity and the stiffness of the vessel, which is related to how much can the aorta distend and how long does it take the pulse wave to be to travel along the aorta. And to do the pulse wave velocity, we use a time to foot calculation method, and from this then we were able to plot the time to foot across the length of the aorta and calculate the pulse wave velocity there. And from then, using the Means-Korteweg equation, we were able to compute the E model, which is the stiffness of the aorta. And our conclusions were that the conduit function is preserved in HLHS in the ascending aorta, however, is not preserved in the descending aorta. This is quite interesting because the ascending aorta was what was where the homograph tissue is, but the descending aorta is not. So it means that by releasing the extra burden of crossing a very narrow aorta ascendingly, then we add the burden to the descending aorta, which was not made to account for such a high velocity. So we in the end generate a pressure drop in the descending aorta that is 3 times what you would expect in healthy controls, which means that in a first stage we are correcting, but down the road it's common that the child ends up having problems at 5-6 years old because the descending aorta at first remodels to be more compliant, but then it becomes stiffer. So here at 3 years is still more compliant, but when it becomes stiffer, then it's we are increasing the pressure, and the ventricle tries to pump more and more, and then it can lead to several issues, both even in the brain, because then the pressure goes to the brain and it affects neurologically the child, and also it affects, the circulation itself. The heart cannot cope, and it's still very, the survival rate is very, very low still. So finally, these were the general results, but of course, each intervention should be carefully planned. Here, a fast example that from the 10 patients we analyzed, each has different geometries of the aorta, each have different variations of the pressure drop in the descending aorta, and it should have a personalized treatment. Of course, because what I am saying, for you it's like enters in one ear and comes out in the other, and it's irrelevant. I want to pass the message that in the end we are working towards trying to save lives, and it's very nice what we do in terms of research and so on, but in the end, if we don't try to improve the life quality of the people, I think we are missing a bit. So I have a small video made by Pablo and an action, and
Jessica was smiley, she was happy, she was absolutely full of joy, she was full of love. When I first found out I was pregnant with Jessica, I was really excited because she was our first child, and we were really looking forward to starting a family. It was all very exciting. We first found out about Jessica's heart condition at the 20-week scan. Most of Jessica's surgeries happened in the first 7 months. She had her surgery when she was first born, then one at 1 week old, then she had another one at 3 months old and another one at 7 months old. So a lot of the first year was spent in hospital, in and out of hospital. And then we got past the surgery at 7 months and we had a nice long period of normality, really.
And generally speaking, she was in good shape, compared to potentially other children with similar conditions.
Jessica had her last surgery the Christmas after she turned 6, and after she went back to school she picked up cold viruses and things like that. Went out for a day with her cousins. She was coughing quite a lot on the way home and struggling to catch her breath. We diverted to A&E. She came home from that with a big bag of antibiotics and medicines, and we thought, great. She was pretty settled. She had quite a good night. The second day she wasn't so well, and then that night she woke up in the early hours, coughing quite a bit, wanted to come into our bed for a snuggle. So she came into our bed. She suddenly complained that her back was hurting, and Michael sat her up to get a better look at her. I turned on the light and she just collapsed at that point. I think deep down I knew at the point that Michael put her on the floor and I started CPR, I knew I wasn't going to get her back. I just had that sense that was it. This was the moment that we've been dreading all that time, and it was then. It was now. And
Mummy and Dad always look after you. They're always there when you're at home.
We've been working in 3 main areas. We develop imaging and computational techniques, trying to improve decisions of the surgeon before, and the quality assessment and checking how everything is going after the surgery. This is the anatomy, the heart, the main pipes, and some of them are underdeveloped. So we work on designing what's the optimal amount and size and shape of that extra tissue that needs to be added to the tiny pipes that these babies are born with. Then we check how well the pipe is working. We can also track how the heart grows.
It's incredibly important, and it's not necessary in the short term. It could be important to a child that's born in 20, 30 years' time.
And we were lucky enough to benefit from some fairly groundbreaking stuff. Had she been born 5, 10 years earlier, we might not have had her for as long as we did.
Yeah. That's why digital twin is very important, because eventually we can improve treatment in 20, 30 years. We will see. Yeah, questions?
Thank you, Joao. Questions from the audience? We are a little bit late and short of time. Questions? I think, Joao, the important thing here also is to see how these tools really add clinical value, no, for physicians, as previously said by Peter. And I think this is a fantastic job for very complex surgeries, such as the example that you show, that this is going to be difficult to demonstrate, but I'm sure this is really useful to plan in advance all these difficult surgeries.
Yeah, definitely 100% agree.